If you can't trust gay Jews to write about hot-blooded Puerto Rican teenagers, who can you trust? Next thing you're going to tell me street gangs don't even dance. And now they're making a movie about Leonard Bernstein, and Bradley Cooper is playing it. I mean, if he can get through the picket lines. You see, like Rachel Brosnahan playing Mrs. Maisel and Helen Mirren playing Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir. Bradley is, sadly, a Gentile. And that's the new sin in Hollywood, being a non-Jewish actor portraying a Jew. Because that's always been the problem in Hollywood, not enough Jews.
Good morning. It's Tuesday, Ayn Rand Tuesday, November the 21st, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So, today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Song of the Day, we will have military shorts, elite units, and the next part of Ayn Rand's book, Philosophy, Who Needs It? All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, 10 military shorts.
As Ronald Madsen and his team were attacking IS fighters in Afghanistan, a devastating explosion suddenly occurred, wounding more than 30 American soldiers. Madsen was thrown to the ground and riddled with shrapnel. Before anyone could escape into one of the armored vehicles, the insurgents launched an all-out attack. Despite his wounds, Madsen ordered his comrades to defend themselves at all costs and then crawled to one of the vehicles. With all his strength, he pulled himself into the turret and began engaging the terrorists with a grenade launcher. After running out of ammunition, he continued to shoot the enemy with his machine gun until it too ran dry. He then grabbed a portable grenade launcher and again let explosive rounds rain down on the IS fighters. Madsen's bold and decisive action inspired the few uninjured soldiers to defend the severely wounded until they could be successfully evacuated. The attack was ultimately repelled, and Madsen was awarded the Silver Star and 3 Purple Heart medals.
Israel shot down a missile in space in what is the first recorded instance of space combat, with the Telegraph reporting that the missile was fired by Yemen Houthis, where it traveled out of the Earth's atmosphere and was intercepted by Israel's Arrow. Israel has suspended a cabinet minister after he suggested nuking Gaza. Iran says that the U.S. will be hit hard if it doesn't implement a ceasefire in Gaza. Meanwhile, Iranian proxies have continued to attack U.S. bases. They've launched at least 40 attacks on America in the past 20 days, with at least 45 troops being injured, according to NBC News. The U.S. has conducted at least 2 airstrikes in response and is now calling on the Iraqi government to stop Iran's proxies from further attacks. You also have the King of Jordan saying they worked with Israel to airdrop medical supplies to a hospital in Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel says that its ground invasion has split Gaza in half, and the IDF says it expects to enter Gaza City within the next 48 hours. And in an interview, a senior Hamas leader called North Korea an ally and suggested that one day they could intervene in the conflict. And this coming after the AP identified Hamas using North Korean-supplied weapons in the October 7th attack.
For some people, a for others, it's a life-saving weapon. In March 2003, an F-16 pilot was searching for Scud missiles in Iraq when he got a dire call. 52 British Special Forces operators were pinned down by some 500 Iraqis and desperately needed air support. But when he arrived on the scene, it was too dark to distinguish between friend and enemy, even with night vision. And with the Iraqis on the verge of overrunning the Brits, time was running out. Thinking fast, the pilot took his F-16 into a climb and dove at the Iraqi position. As he hurtled toward the ground, shock waves formed around his F-16 until he broke the sound barrier, sending a single shock wave straight at the enemy. The loud clap made the Iraqis think they were being bombed, which caused them to scatter. But just then, a missile locked onto the F-16, and the pilot had to take evasive action. It wasn't until back at base that he learned his supersonic weapon had worked.
Have you seen the new super advanced helicopter by the U.S. Army? World War III is going to be crazy when this helicopter starts rolling out. This is the MQ-8 Fire Scout. This high-tech helicopter has a range of features that make it unique. First, its distinctive 4-blade main rotors not only reduce noise but also increase lift capacity and performance. What powers this beast is the mighty Rolls-Royce M250 turboshaft engine. This powerful engine allows the MQ-8 to reach a maximum speed of 213 kilometers per hour, while reaching altitudes of up to 20,000 feet. However, what truly makes the MQ-8 a game-changer is its advanced avionics system. This new technology not only automates various tasks, but also improves its skills as a combat helicopter. Its arsenal is crazy. It has the ability to carry Hellfire missiles, Viper Strike laser-guided weapons, advanced precision kill weapon systems, and laser-guided 70mm folding fin rockets.
On September 6, 2007, an Israeli force of 4 F-15s and 4 F-16s penetrated deep into Syrian territory, dropped a payload of bombs, and flew back to Israel under the cover of darkness. This destructive act could have led to an all-out war between the two countries. Instead, both Israel and Syria denied that the raid had ever happened. Why? In 2018, Israel finally admitted the true reason behind the mysterious flight, that they had bombed and destroyed a suspected nuclear facility. You see, months before the raid, Israeli intelligence had discovered a Syrian nuclear reactor being operated by North Korean workers. That reactor, they feared, could only have one purpose: to produce an atomic bomb. So the Israeli Air Force snuck past Syrian air defenses and eliminated the threat using 17 tons of explosives. Then they pretended it never happened. Syria, not wanting to draw attention to their nuclear ambitions, kept quiet too, which is how a devastating airstrike remained a secret for years. When Steve Phillis flew over the column of 10,000 enemy Iraqi soldiers to provide cover for his wingman, he knew he wasn't coming back. You see, the A-10 pilot had been dropping bombs over Saddam's elite Republican Guards division as part of Desert Storm when a surface-to-air missile was launched at his wingman. The wingman, a younger pilot, deployed flares in an attempt to escape, but the missile ripped through part of his wing, forcing him to eject. That left the young pilot dangling above the enemy army he had just been bombing. He would have been an easy target, but just then Phyllis flew over the column and began dropping flares in order to draw attention away from his parachuting wingman. He continued his heroic flight for 3 minutes and 45 seconds, all the while coordinating his wingman's rescue, until he was finally shot down and killed. The wingman was captured but survived the war. While Phyllis's actions earned him a posthumous Silver Star, some believe his sacrifice merits the highest award of all, the Medal of Honor.
Texas was able to come close to the shore and maintain direct fire from all her guns. By that time, Texas's armament was already far behind the comparing to the latest battleship's range of fire. But the commander found an original solution to this problem. He flooded part of the torpedo protection rules, tilting the ship and increasing the elevation angle of the guns. This adjustment allowed the USS Texas to strike all of her planned targets. Texas would fire more than 500 rounds, allowing the Allies were able to gain a foothold on the shore and expand it.
The mission was as straightforward as it was dangerous. 4 F-105 thuds were to fly into the heart of the North Vietnamese defenses, allow themselves to be targeted by radar, and then take out the SAM batteries, all the while being pursued by patrols of MiG-21s. The point of this suicidal attack was to track the location of enemy SAM sites and then neutralize them for the fighter bombers following behind. The mission began badly, with 2 of the 4 F-105s being shot down right away. But a remaining F-105, accompanied by his wingman, pressed the attack. As he dove in, 2 MiG-21s fired missiles at him, which he dodged, flying deeper into the North Vietnamese anti-aircraft artillery in order to lose his pursuers. Although he was only required to make 2 passes, he attacked again and again until his aircraft was full of holes. Finally, he destroyed the radar with an AGM-45, and after bombing and strafing the remaining SAM sites, the 2 F-105s hightailed it back to base, miraculously still alive.
The U.S. Army has a new Titan in the skies. This is the next future attack helicopter and the U.S. Army dominance, the Bell 360 Invictus. The Invictus has unparalleled maneuverability and survivability thanks to its high-speed rotor system and state-of-the-art avionics. This beast is built to thrive in the world's most complex and fiercely contested territories. With a top speed rocketing beyond 230 miles per hour and the stamina to cover over 155 miles in one stretch, this helicopter can soar as high as 10,000 feet. And if its intelligence and athleticism weren't enough, its firepower boasting a 20-millimeter cannon and rockets. The Bell 360 Invictus is armed to the teeth, making it an airborne fortress. The future of aerial combat has arrived. What do you think?
In 1967, the U.S. Air Force had a massive problem on their hands. The North Vietnamese had already shot down over 300 aircraft and were now beginning to use the lightning-quick MiG-21 with devastating results. Then, in steps Robin Olds, a World War II ace who, despite looking the part of a Hollywood commander, had never flown in an F-4 Phantom. Taking command of the 8th Fighter Wing, he decided to lure the elusive MiGs into combat by using flights of F-4s to imitate bomb-laden F-105s. On January 2, 1967, Olds and the rest of the strike force pretended to be F-105s on a bombing run, hoping to draw the enemy into combat. At first, no MiGs engaged them, and Olds turned around thinking the ruse had failed. But when the next flight of F-4s ran straight into a group of MiG-21s, the killing began. Armed with guided missiles, the Phantoms shot down 7 MiG-21s in quick succession. Of the 16 total North Vietnamese MiG-21s, they destroyed nearly half that day.
And that was the military shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, inside the U.S. military's 5 elite Tier 1 units, what do they do?
The United States Special Operations Forces encompass a wide range of highly capable units that tackle some of the most demanding missions ever seen before. While numerous soft units possess exceptional capabilities and have earned their stripes, there are just 5 particular units that stand out among the rest as Tier 1 Special Mission Units under the Joint Special Operations Command. These 5 units operate in the shadows and make a gigantic impact throughout the world while leaving virtually no trace of their existence. With that said, what are the 5 U.S. military Tier 1 units? How much is known about them? And most importantly, what do they do? Join us as we dive into some of the most highly classified and secretive special operations units in the United States military. This is the 5 Tier 1 units of the U.S. military. Let's kick things off with Delta Force. Did you ever worry about the boogeyman at night as a kid? Well, for enemies of the United States, they actually have one. Delta Force. Well known for their professionalism, secrecy, and mission success rates, Delta Force is the premier special mission unit of the U.S. Army, always willing to answer the call for the toughest missions out there. Despite being one of the most recognized Tier 1 units in JSOC, the Department of Defense tightly controls information about Delta Force, refusing to comment publicly on the highly secretive unit and its activities. These operators work under the veil of secrecy, hidden from the enemy. As an elite counterterrorism unit, Delta Force has been part of several important missions that have made national headlines, such as the capture of Saddam Hussein, assisting with the evacuation of personnel from the embassy during the 2012 Benghazi attack, and capturing drug kingpin El Chapo. Interestingly enough, Delta Force actually goes by several different monikers. You may have heard it be referred to as the Combat Applications Group, Army Compartmented Elements, and 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. But despite the several names this elite unit has, there's one thing that everyone knows about it. You don't want to be on the receiving end of what they're capable of. Where was I? Oh yeah. Because of how multifaceted Delta Force's mission set is, its operators are highly skilled and trained in specialized disciplines in order to see their missions through. In fact, many of Delta Force's personnel are seasoned SOF operators who've had years and years of experience doing what they do best. The overarching purpose of Delta Force is to execute complex, high-stakes missions that regular SOF forces wouldn't be able to do as efficiently, as JSOC has no room for failure. These missions are highly classified and dangerous, and range from hostage rescue, counter-terrorism, direct action, special reconnaissance, capturing high-value targets, and dismantling terrorist cells. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Delta Force and its operators are extremely flexible with their capabilities, and the unit is not limited based on those primary missions. Their teams are small, agile, and able to deploy rapidly wherever JSOC taps them with the next job at hand. Delta Force operators are placed in one of its 4 assault squadrons, which are named Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta respectively. Each of these have 2 direct action assault troops, which consist of shooters, and a recon and surveillance troop, which has shooters and snipers. Fun fact, Delta Force's structure is inspired by the British Special Air Service. Additionally, each Delta Force operator is trained in a wide variety of skills to ensure they will thrive in the environments they get thrown into. Some of these skills are close quarters combat, hand-to-hand combat, direct action, and advanced marksmanship, because being able to rapidly breach, clear, and search buildings and rooms is an essential tactical skill for this unit. So you know a bit about what the US government allows you to know about Delta Force. But what about how you can get into this unit? For starters, Delta Force routinely pulls personnel from mainly the Army Green Berets and Army Rangers. But what makes this unit unique is that it allows people from every branch of the military, SOF or not, to try out. Thus, you can say Delta Force is like the equal opportunity employer of the Tier 1 units. Delta Force selection is unlike any other selection out there, as most of its candidates are already SOF members with years of experience in multiple deployments. They gotta get creative with their gut checks. Delta Force selection is roughly 4 weeks long and occurs twice a year in Camp Dawson, West Virginia. During these 4 gruesome weeks, candidates are put to the test like they've never been before with various day and nighttime land navigation courses, where they'll be expected to ruck multiple miles with a heavy load on their back. As the distances increase, so does the weight, but the timelines decrease. But it's not all physical. On top of already being mentally tested on the brutal physicality, candidates undergo numerous psych exams. They're barraged with questions from a board of Delta instructors and unit psychologists, and their answers are heavily scrutinized, getting dissected piece by piece. This is intended to mentally wear down the candidate. It all culminates with a 40-mile ruck march to be completed in an unknown amount of time, known as the Long Walk. Assuming they don't quit, only after this is completed will a candidate know if they were selected into Delta Force. If selected in the 4-week course, candidates will then go off the grid, hardly effectively communicating with anyone from the outside world to attend the 6-month operator training course. OTC is the constantly evolving end-stage portion of the Delta Force pipeline. Here, you can expect to be trained in a variety of small arms, as well as specialized roles like support weapons and sniping and observing. The course also involves an advanced parachuting school, training in CQC, demolitions, tradecraft, and VIP protection tactics. After OTC, a newly minted Delta Force operator will integrate with a team and begin working up for their first mission. To put this in perspective on how tough this selection really is, a Delta Force operator once said that only 12 to 14 completed out of a pool of 120 applicants, which is absolutely insane. Remember, those numbers don't reflect average Joes showing up to selection. They're mostly soft operators or those Delta Force deemed worthy of giving a shot. With Delta Force covered, let's move on to the next Tier 1 Special Mission Unit, the U.S. Navy's SEAL Team 6. SEAL Team 6, officially known as the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, or DevGRU for short, hardly requires an introduction. From high-profile missions capturing national headlines to blockbuster movies and best-selling books, SEAL Team 6 has become a household name. But despite their fame, as you'll come to learn with any of the Tier 1 units, many of the finer details about DevGRU are classified and unknown to the world. As the premier counterterrorism unit of the U.S. Navy, SEAL Team 6 is quite literally the definition of best of the best, as this unit is made up of SEALs selected from existing SEAL teams. As you'd expect from a Tier 1 Special Mission Unit in JSOC, they're utilized in the full spectrum of operations. DevGRU specializes in areas such as counterterrorism, direct action, hostage rescue, high-value target extraction, counter-proliferation, special reconnaissance, and a whole slew of other things. But there's two things that set SEAL Team 6 apart from the other Tier 1 units: its maritime and free-fall capabilities. It's no secret that Navy SEALs are known for their talent in the water. Hell, even their name literally deals with an aquatic animal. But when you put together the best Navy SEALs into a Tier 1 unit, you can be certain that they will be taking their maritime skills and expertise to the next level. Additionally, SEAL Team 6 operators spend a lot of time perfecting their free-fall skills, or more specifically, halo and hey-ho jumps. While most special operations personnel receive free-fall training, SEAL Team 6 takes their skill set to another level. Mastery of freefall requires lots of training and practice to begin with, but they've been known to spend a considerable amount of time and resources to ensure they can conduct those types of missions with the utmost precision. For example, during the hunt for Osama bin Laden, SEAL Team 6 always had an assault troop on standby to conduct a hey-ho jump into Pakistan to neutralize or capture him. But how is SEAL Team 6 structured to get the job done? All in all, there are 6 squadrons within the unit, each with their own purpose and specialty. 4 out of the 6 squadrons are the assault squadrons, which is where the operators are placed. For the assault squadrons, there's the Red Squadron, known as the Tribe, or Red Men, the Blue Squadron, known as the Pirates, the Silver Squadron, which uses a mix of the other squadron's insignias, and the Gold Squadron, known as the Knights or Crusaders. Each of these squadrons are divided into 3 troops of SEALs, and the troops are divided into even smaller teams. Each DevGRU operator plays a specific role in these teams. Then there's the Gray and Black Squadrons, which are the support squadrons. The Gray Squadron is known as the Vikings and consists of divers and personnel trained to drive the custom vehicles utilized by SEAL Team 6. And last but not least, the Black Squadron, which conducts reconnaissance, surveillance, espionage, and advanced force operations. With the mission set and structure of SEAL Team 6 covered, let's move on to its selection process. DevGRU's selection is known as Green Team. Unlike the other Tier 1 units, this selection is only limited to one community, the Navy SEALs. But not just any Navy SEAL. Only the top performing team guys who are in peak physical condition get invited to try out for SEAL Team 6. Typically, they will have multiple deployments under their belt and over 5 years of experience in the teams. Green Team selection process happens once a year and lasts around 6 months. These candidates, which will remind you have already passed one of the hardest military selection processes in the entire world, are put through yet another challenging and arduous selection. They're constantly observed, scrutinized, and evaluated by the DevGRU instructors, being put through immense pressure. Roughly 50% make it through Green Team and onto SEAL Team 6. Yes, you heard that right. A selection process that weeds out people who have passed what is considered the world's toughest military training has an attrition rate of 50%. 100%. Let that sink in. It's safe to say that SEAL Team 6 has solidified its place as not just a Tier 1 Special Operations unit, but as a legendary fighting force. If you enjoy our content and want to support the channel, please help us reach our goal of 5,000 Facebook followers. If you don't have a Facebook but still want to support us, please consider contributing to us on Patreon, where we have some pretty cool benefits. The links to these will be in the description and pinned comment below. With SEAL Team 6 covered, let's jump into the 24th Special Tactics Squadron. When the Tier 1 units need advanced coordination of air assets, direct fire missions via close air support, the recovery of downed personnel in enemy territory, or advanced battlefield medical care, who do they call? That would be the 24th Special Tactics Squadron, the U.S. Air Force's only Tier 1 Special Mission Unit in JSOC. Also known as Task Force White, the 24th STS is an elite group of airmen whose main mission is supporting and enabling the other Special Mission Units within JSOC. Air dominance and control over any area of operation has long been a crucial element of military doctrine, especially when it comes to soft missions. The primary purpose of the 24th STS is to help further that doctrine and ensure that U.S. air power is fully utilized alongside ground-based special operations forces. This is what separates the 24th STS from its other Tier 1 counterparts, as it is not solely a direct combat-oriented team. It carries with it a number of other purposes, including airfield reconnaissance, personnel recovery and triage, assessment and control, joint terminal attack control, and even humanitarian efforts. The communities that make up the 24th STS are predominantly Air Force combat controllers, pararescuemen, special reconnaissance, and select tactical air control party personnel. These airmen typically augment the other Tier 1 units and embed within their teams where they bring their unique skill sets and talents to the table. To put things simply, you can look at the 24th STS like the free agents of the Tier 1 units. We'll give you an example with the combat controllers. Normally, CCTs are often a one-man attachment to special operations teams because they are a force multiplier and are the only certified air traffic controllers on the battlefield for calling in air support. CCTs in the 24th STS have an added layer of training in order to be able to match the operational tempo of a Tier 1 unit. And believe us, they do exactly that. The story of John A. Chapman, a 24th STS CCT, sums up what we're trying to say perfectly. In 2002, while attached to a SEAL team, Chapman was severely injured and his team was forced to abandon him. Despite being mortally wounded and alone, Chapman would hold his ground against 24 enemy combatants in one of the bravest one-man stands ever witnessed. His actions and self-sacrifice would save 23 lives that day, and is one of the most courageous acts of heroism the world has ever seen. What you just witnessed was the first Medal of Honor ever recorded on video. Whether it's a CCT augmenting a team for their air support, a PJ being used for their medical capabilities, or special recon for the reconnaissance assets, the 24th STS can be found working alongside the best of the best. And this is yet another thing that separates them from operators in the other Tier 1 units. Not only do they know how to do their own organic job, but they also receive training to be up to speed with whatever unit they wind up working with. As such, all 24th STS members are trained in counterterrorism, direct action, hostage rescue, counterinsurgency, special reconnaissance, and much, much more. They're quite literally the jack of all trades. With the 24th STS covered, let's move on to the Regimental Reconnaissance Company. The United States Army Rangers are one of the most capable and lethal fighting forces in the entire world. As the Army's premier direct action raid force, there's a reason why almost everyone has heard of their motto, Rangers Lead the Way. But what if we told you that within the highly renowned 75th Ranger Regiment lies a mysterious, secretive unit that executes some of the world's most covert operations? That would be the Regimental Reconnaissance Company, the Army Rangers Tier 1 unit. The Regimental Reconnaissance Company generally consists of the best U.S. Army Rangers, who are trained not only to do everything a Ranger can do, but much more. The unit's three primary tasks are active reconnaissance, surveillance, and direct action. However, in furtherance of its mission set, it's also involved in conducting raids, ambushes, patrols, demolitions, and direct airstrikes. Despite its combat capabilities, RRC is often tasked with performing reconnaissance for the other Tier 1 units in JSOC, which requires a higher level of intel, analysis, and proficiency to ensure that ops run smoothly. As such, the RRC prides itself on being an adaptable and dedicated intelligence unit, and are masters of human, signal, electronic, and communications intelligence. Each RRC operator has a lot of highly refined skills and can even learn interrogation techniques, surveillance, and computer hacking. In order to get into RRC, the Ranger Regiment only taps the best performing Rangers to try out for its selection process. RRC selection is a two-phase process, where the first phase is designed to weed out candidates, and the second phase is designed to build up and train those who made it through. Phase 1 of the selection process for RRC is 2 weeks long in an undisclosed area. Candidates will conduct long-distance, advanced land navigation while rucking with around 60 to 70 pounds of weight. Each day, they can easily expect to cover over 12 to 18 miles in mountainous terrain, as well as having to do some fast-paced ruck marches. To top that all off, there's even an event where they must ruck roughly 30 to 40 miles, but the actual distance is never disclosed. And if that wasn't enough, they go through a series of psychological evals, interviews, and must pass a review board to move on to Phase 2 of training. Phase 2 consists of the 29-week recon training course. Here, candidates will learn the skills they will use to operate as JSOC's reconnaissance asset. Candidates will build the foundations of an RRC operator by learning skills such as military freefall, advanced communications, digital photography, computers, photo editing, fieldcraft and stalks, infiltration and exfiltration methods, close air support, advanced driving techniques, demolitions, advanced medical techniques, and tactical man tracking. Due to their rigorous and in-depth training, discreet nature, and ability to fulfill the essential role of support in intelligence operations, it's safe to say that the Regimental Reconnaissance Company is a lethal foe, yet an invaluable ally. While the totality of their operations is not yet fully known, nor will it likely ever be, you can bet that wherever the 75th Ranger Regiment is, the RRC is not too far behind. With the Regimental Reconnaissance Company covered, let's move on to the intelligence support activity. Arguably the most covert and secretive Tier 1 unit of the bunch, the intelligence support activity is unlike any other Tier 1 unit discussed today. While other soft forces are mostly dedicated to direct combat, the ISA focuses more towards secretive and clandestine actions necessary to support other military operations. In fact, its scope is quite large. Not only does it support JSOC, but it also supports SOCOM and other intelligence agencies. All in all, it's been said the ISA is the U.S. military's own covert army. Officially known as the First Capabilities Integration Group Airborne, the ISA conducts intelligence and espionage operations at a tactical level. To boil things down, you could look at an ISA operative similar to a CIA case officer. But don't get it twisted, most ISA operatives are highly skilled Green Berets, and even though they can function as shooters and operators, most of its personnel are selected because they are uniquely multilingual, as well as for their raw intelligence and ability to be placed deep undercover. Naturally, as an intelligence-centric unit, the most common products of ISA's operations are through the collection of human intelligence and signals intelligence. ISA human intelligence collectors gather information from human sources via coercion and interrogation depending on the asset. Their operatives are masters of screening, tactical questioning, interrogation, and liaison operations, which enable them to collect the best intelligence possible. Additionally, ISA operatives gather signals intelligence primarily by intercepting enemy communications or sending an agent to physically bug a target. And as you may expect, there are also teams within the ISA who can conduct direct action missions should the need arise. It is believed that the ISA consists of a few squadrons, each with something unique to bring to the table. There's the Operations Squadron, sometimes referred to as the Human Intelligence or Ground Squadron, which functions as the ISA's Human Intelligence Collection Squadron. Then there's the Signals Intelligence Squadron, which you might have guessed is responsible for the ISA Signals Intelligence mission. Lastly, there's the Mission Support Squadron. The breakdown of the squadron isn't exactly known, but it likely contains logistical support for the two operational squadrons, such as procuring equipment, getting funding for operations or training, and human resources functions. Although most of the information about the intelligence support activity remains in obscurity, it has become one of the most interesting and influential special operations groups at the disposal of JSOC and the U.S. military. While there are technically only 5 Tier 1 units within JSOC, it wouldn't be right not to give an honorable mention to the unit that has been supporting each and every single one of the Tier 1 units, and has been a part of several major special operations missions in U.S. military history. That unit would be the world's premier special operations aviation unit, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, also referred to as the Night Stalkers. Specializing in transport, attack, and reconnaissance missions, Night Stalkers are highly trained and ready to accomplish the very toughest missions in all environments, anywhere in the world, day or night, with world-class precision. If you're wondering why this unit is trusted with transporting the U.S. military's finest warriors, and you'd like to learn more about them, we highly recommend you go watch our video we made on them. The link for it will be in the description below, along with the rest of our social medias, which we highly encourage you to go check out. With every Tier 1 unit covered, you now know everything that the U.S. government permits you to know about its highly mysterious and elite Tier 1 special mission units.
And that was inside the U.S. military's 5 elite Tier 1 units. What do they do? Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the next part of Philosophy Who Needs It by Ayn Rand.
15. Censorship. Local and Express, 1973. I have been saying for many years that statism is winning by default, by the intellectual default of capitalism's alleged defenders, that freedom and capitalism have never had a firm philosophical base, that today's conservatives share all the fundamental premises of today's liberals, and thus have paved, and are still paving, the road to statism. I have also said repeatedly that the battle for freedom is primarily philosophical and cannot be won by any lesser means, because philosophy rules human existence, including politics. But philosophy is a science that deals with the broadest abstractions, and therefore many people do not know how to observe its influence in practice, or how to grasp the process by which it affects the conditions of their daily life. A recent event, however, offers a clear, striking illustration of that process. It shows philosophy's influence in action, and reveals the essence and the contradictions of both the conservative and the liberal ideologies. This event is the decision of the Supreme Court in 5 recent obscenity cases. In the Ayn Rand letter of November 20th, 1972, I expressed hope in regard to the 4 men appointed to the Supreme Court by President Nixon, even though it was too early to tell the exact nature of their views. But, I said, if they live up to their enormous responsibility, we may forgive Mr. Nixon a great many of his defaults. The Supreme Court is the last remnant of a philosophical influence in this country. Today, less than a year later, the evidence is sufficient to indicate that there are no intellectual grounds left for forgiving Mr. Nixon. Since inconsistent premises lead to inconsistent actions, it is not impossible that the present Supreme Court may make some liberating decisions. For instance, the court made a great contribution to justice and to the protection of individual rights when it legalized abortion. I am not in agreement with all of the reasoning given in that decision, but I am in enthusiastic agreement with the result, i.e., with the recognition of a woman's right to her own body. But the court's decision in regard to obscenity takes an opposite stand. It denies a man's or a woman's right to exercise of his own mind by establishing the legal and intellectual base of censorship. Before proceeding to discuss that decision, I want to state for the record my own view of what is called hardcore pornography. I regard it as unspeakably disgusting. I have not read any of the books or seen any of the current movies belonging to that category, and I do not intend ever to read or see them. The descriptions provided in legal cases, as well as the modern touches in softcore productions, are sufficient grounds on which to form an opinion. The reason of my opinion is the opposite of the usual one. I do not regard sex as evil. I regard it as good, as one of the most important aspects of human life, too important to be made the subject of public anatomical display. But the issue here is not one's view of sex. The issue is freedom of speech and of the press, i.e., the right to hold any view and to express it. It is not very inspiring to fight for the freedom of the purveyors of pornography or their customers, but in the transition to statism, every infringement of human rights has begun with the suppression of a given right's least attractive practitioners. In this case, the disgusting nature of the offenders makes it a good test of one's loyalty to a principle. In the 5 obscenity cases decided on June 21st, 1973, the court was divided 5-4. In each case, the majority opinion was written by Chief Justice Burger, joined by Justices Blackmun, Powell, Rehnquist, all 4 appointed by Nixon, and Justice White, appointed by Kennedy. In each case, the dissenting opinion was written by Justice Brennan, joined by Justices Stewart and Marshall. Justice Douglas, in each case, wrote a separate dissenting opinion. The 2 most important cases are Miller v. California and Paris Adult Theater 1 v. Slatton. The Miller case involves a man who was convicted in California of mailing unsolicited, sexually explicit material, which advertises pornographic books. It is in the Miller decision that Chief Justice Burger promulgated the new criteria for judging whether a given work is obscene or not. They are as follows. The basic guidelines for the trier of fact must be A. Whether the average person applying contemporary community standards would find that the work taken as a whole appeals to the prurient interest. B. Whether the work depicts or describes in a patently offensive way sexual conduct specifically defined by the applicable state law. And C. Whether the work taken as a whole lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. These criteria are based on previous Supreme Court decisions, particularly on Roth versus United States, 1957. 9 years later, in the case of Memoirs versus Massachusetts, 1966, the Supreme Court introduced a new criterion. A book cannot be prescribed unless it is found to be utterly without redeeming social value. This was bad enough, but the present decision emphatically rejects that particular notion and substitutes a horrendous criterion of its own. Whether the work taken as a whole lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Morally, this criterion, as well as the rest of Chief Justice Burger's decision, taken as a whole, is a proclamation of collectivism. Not so much political as specifically moral collectivism. The intellectual standard which is here set up to rule an individual's mind, to prescribe what an individual may write, publish, read, or see, is the judgment of an average person, applying community standards. Why? No reason is given. Which means that the will of the collective is here taken for granted as the source, justification, and criterion of value judgments. What is a community? No definition is given. It may therefore be a state, a city, a neighborhood, or just the block you live on. What are community standards? No definition is given. In fact, the standards of a community, when and if they can be observed as such, as distinguished from the standards of its individual citizens, are a product of chance, lethargy, hypocrisy, second-handedness, indifference, fear, the manipulations of local busybodies, or small-time power lusters, and occasionally the traditional acceptance of some decent values inherited from some great mind of the past. But the great mind is now to be outlawed by the ruling of the Supreme Court. Who is the average person? No definition is given. There is some indication that the term in this context means a person who is neither particularly susceptible or sensitive nor totally insensitive in regard to sex. But to find a sexually average person is a more preposterously impossible undertaking than to find the average representative of any other human characteristic. And, besides, this is not what the court decision says. It says simply average, which, in an issue of judgment, means intellectually average. Average in intelligence, in ability, in ideas, in feelings, in tastes, which means a conformist or a non-entity. Any proposition concerned with establishing a human average necessarily eliminates the top and the bottom, i.e. the best and the worst. Thus, the standards of a genius and the standards of a moron are automatically eliminated, suppressed, or prohibited, and both are ordered to subordinate their views to those of the average. Why is the average person to be granted so awesome a privilege? By reason of the fact that he possesses no special distinction. Nothing can justify such a notion except the theory of collectivism, which is itself unjustifiable. The court's decision asserts repeatedly, just asserts, that this ruling applies only to hardcore pornography or obscenity, i.e., to certain ideas dealing with sex, not to any other kinds of ideas. Other kinds of ideas, it keeps asserting, are protected by the First Amendment, but ideas dealing with sex are not. Apart from the impossibility of drawing a line between these two categories, which we shall discuss later, this distinction is contradicted and invalidated right in the text of this same decision. The trial judges and juries are empowered to determine whether a work that contains sexual elements, quote, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. This means, and can mean nothing else, that the government is empowered to judge literary, artistic, political, and scientific values, and to permit or suppress certain works accordingly. The alleged limits on that power, the conditions of when, where, and by whom it may be exercised, are of no significance once the principle that the government holds such a power has been established. The result is only a matter of details and of time. The present Supreme Court may seek to suppress only sexual materials. On the same basis, the will of the community, a future court may suppress undesirable scientific discussions. Still another court may suppress political discussions. And a year later, all discussions in all fields would be suppressed. The law functions by a process of deriving logical consequences from established precedents. The average person's community standards criterion was set up in the Roth case. But the Roth criterion of utterly without redeeming social value was too vague to be immediately dangerous. Anything may be claimed to have some sort of social value. So, logically, on the basis of that precedent, the present court took the next step toward censorship. It gave to the government the power of entry into 4 specific intellectual fields, with the power to judge whether the values of works in these fields are serious or not. Serious is an unserious standard. Who is to determine what is serious? To whom? And by what criterion? Since no definition is given, one must assume that the criterion to apply is the only one promulgated in those guidelines, what the average person would find serious. Do you care to contemplate the spectacle of the average person as the ultimate authority, the censor, in the field of literature, in the field of art, in the field of politics, in the field of science? An authority whose edict is to be imposed by force, and is to determine what will be permitted or suppressed in all these fields? I submit that no pornographic movie can be as morally obscene as a prospect of this kind. No first-rate talent in any of those fields will ever be willing to work by the intellectual standards and under the orders of any authority, even if it were an authority composed of the best brains in the world, who would not accept the job, let alone an authority consisting of average persons. And the greater the talent, the less the willingness. As to those who would be willing, observe the moral irony of the fact that they do exist today in large numbers and are generally despised. They are the hacks, the box office chasers, who try to please what they think are the tastes and the standards of the public for the sake of making money. Apparently, intellectual prostitution is evil if done for a selfish motive, but noble if accepted in selfless service to the moral purity of the community. In another of the 5 obscenity cases, U.S. versus 12 200-foot reels of Super 8mm film, in a totally different context, Chief Justice Burger himself describes the danger created by the logical implications of a precedent. The seductive plausibility of single steps in a chain of evolutionary development of a legal rule is often not perceived until a 3rd, 4th, or 5th logical extension occurs. Each step, when taken, appeared a reasonable step in relation to that which preceded it, although the aggregate or end result is one that would never have been seriously considered in the first instance. This kind of gestative propensity calls for the line drawing familiar in the judicial, as in the legislative process. Thus far, but not beyond. I would argue that since a legal rule is a principle, the development of its logical consequences must not be cut off, except by repealing the principle. But assuming that such a cutoff were possible, no line of any sort is drawn in the Miller decision. The community standards of average persons are explicitly declared to be a sovereign power over sexual matters and over the works that deal with sexual matters. In the same Miller decision, Chief Justice Burger admits that no such line can be drawn. Nothing in the First Amendment requires that a jury must consider hypothetical or unassertable national standards when attempting to determine whether certain materials are obscene as a matter of fact. He quotes Chief Justice Warren saying in an earlier case, "I believe that there is no provable national standard. At all events, this court has not been able to enunciate one, and it would be unreasonable to expect local courts to divine one." By what means are local courts to divine a local one? Actually, the only provable standard of what constitutes obscenity would be an objective standard, philosophically proved and valid for all men. Such a standard cannot be defined or enforced in terms of law. It would require the formulation of an entire philosophic system. But even this would not grant anyone the right to enforce that standard on others. When the court, however, speaks of a provable national standard, it does not mean an objective standard. It substitutes the collective for the objective and seeks to enunciate a standard held by all the average persons of the nation. Since even a guess at such a concept is patently impossible, the court concludes that what is impossible and improper nationally is permissible locally, and in effect passes the buck to state legislatures, granting them the power to enforce arbitrary, unprovable local standards. Chief Justice Burger's arguments in the Miller decision are not very persuasive. It is neither realistic nor constitutionally sound to read the First Amendment as requiring that the people of Maine or Mississippi accept public depiction of conduct found tolerable in Las Vegas or New York City. I read the First Amendment as not requiring any person anywhere to accept any depiction he does not wish to read or see, but forbidding him to abridge the rights and freedom of those who do wish to read or see it. In another argument against a national standard of what constitutes obscenity, the decision declares, "People in different states vary in their tastes and attitudes, and this diversity is not to be strangled by the absolutism of imposed uniformity." What about the absolutism of imposed uniformity within a state? What about the nonconformists in that state? What about communication between citizens of different states? What about the freedom of a national marketplace of ideas? No answers are given. The following argument, offered in a footnote, is unworthy of a serious tribunal. The mere fact juries may reach different conclusions as to the same material does not mean that constitutional rights are abridged. As this court observed in Roth versus United States, it is common experience that different juries may reach different results under any criminal statute. That is one of the consequences we accept under our jury system. In a criminal case, the jury's duty is only to determine whether a particular defendant committed the crime which is clearly and specifically defined by the statute. Under the new obscenity ruling, a jury is expected to determine whether the defendant committed an undefined crime and, simultaneously, to determine what that crime is. Thus, the Nixon court's notion of censorship sharing by diffusing it at random over the entire country is as illusory as Nixon's notion of returning power to the states by means of revenue sharing. While the public rides on the creaking train of local censorship, with delays, derailments, and chaos at every whistle stop, the express of statism is flying full speed on an unobstructed track.
And that was the first part of Chapter 15 from Ayn Rand's book, Philosophy, Who Needs It? Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.